Today, we're joined by Cheri Bustos, a seasoned politician and former journalist, member of Congress, and chair of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. And Cheri, you're also from rural Northwest Illinois. From your perspective, what issues are most important to rural voters during this election season?
Well, I think, first of all, I want to talk a little bit about the Farm Bill, because when I was in Congress, I worked on 3 farm bills. And I just left office a year ago this past January. And because I chaired the General Farm Commodities and Risk Management Subcommittee of the House Ag Committee, we actually did field hearings all over the country to help lay the groundwork for this next Farm Bill. And as you know, and anybody watching this who has interest in ag policy, we're already a year past the deadline of when we were to have passed a farm bill. My guess is when September rolls around, just next month, which will be the next deadline for trying to pass a farm bill, I think that they will not get it done by then as well. And look, this is the fundamental, the foundation of making sure that we have good ag policy for our family farmers and for agriculture all over the country. And, look, I won't try to get overly partisan here, but the House Democrats, who are in the majority right now, have not been able to get that done. It became this hyper partisan piece of legislation. And so my prediction, if we want to talk about what's important, I think it's getting that farm bill passed, but my guess is it will not happen. And I know Debbie Stabenow, Senator Stabenow out of Michigan, who leads the Senate Ag Committee. I know she wants to do this because she's leaving office and wants to get this done. But you got to have a willing partner in this. And if you're going to draw lines in the sand to say if we don't have this program or these cuts or whatever it is, as opposed to compromising, I think it's going to be hard to get that done. So I would say, number one, that farm bill. And my guess is whoever the next person who occupies the White House, that will fall on them, and who's ever holding the speaker's gavel and who's ever leading the Senate. They've got to make sure that we don't go yet another year without a farm bill. So I'm going to start with that. I can get into a lot of rural ag, rural America policy and all of that if you want to ask further questions about it. But with that, I just want to say that's critical to get that done. The House Republican leadership has been unable to get that done. We're already a year past deadline. My guess is we will miss this current deadline that's right around the corner as well. That's not good for our family farmers.
And what are some of the broader issues important to rural voters this year?
Well, look, I live in a town of 3,500 people in the far northwest corner of the state of Illinois. I can tell you that when we go downtown, and it's a historic downtown, you can't even text anybody. So that access to making sure that we have cell towers in rural America, to make sure that we have high-speed internet access in every town in America. You cannot have a small business in many of these small towns because you don't have high-speed internet. The Biden-Harris administration has the money to get high-speed internet to every corner of America. That still needs to be implemented and executed. But if Harris is elected as our next president, I see that as continuing. Same thing with the water quality when you're looking at rural America. That has been addressed. I voted for these programs. I voted for the high-speed internet program. In fact, I was at the White House for that announcement, along with some of the smallest providers in the smaller towns all over the country, to make sure that was not only accessible but also affordable. So water quality is also important. If you look at USDA rural development, there is money in there to make sure that the water quality is addressed at every in every small town in America, but that has to be executed as well. And then the other thing is, I'm going to talk about ethanol. I'm from farm or corn country. I'm in Illinois and I border Iowa. So as you know, because you're from Bondurant, Iowa, it's a really important issue. What are we going to do with sustainable aviation fuel? What is the future of ethanol when you look at this evolution to electric vehicles? And then the carbon capture that goes along with that. The Biden-Harris administration has these tax credits to execute on that. I think that all of that is at risk if we don't continue these policies that are setting that in the right direction. I appreciate USDA Secretary Vilsack, who's from your home state of Iowa, who understands these issues deeply. His number two over at USDA, Xochitl Torres Small, also understands these issues at a granular level. And that is why we've got this year-round E15 in the Midwestern states, because that is so critically important. But those are the kind of things that I hear. And of course, probably the last thing that I hear from our family farmers is making sure that crop insurance is always, we get that we keep that in the right place. It was the number one thing that I heard when I was first elected back in 2012 for that. And then going into that next farm bill, we actually got that in the right place for our family farmers and making sure that that's not compromised. You've got to have that strong safety net for our family farmers to make sure that they can stay in business and succeed and thrive.
Trump has seen support from across farm countries since he first ran for office. What is your message to rural voters and in particular farmers who have supported Trump in the last two elections?
Well, I would say look at the facts instead of the emotion. The facts are that when Donald Trump was president, we had many of our family farmers were surviving because of subsidies. They don't want to survive because of subsidies. They want to thrive because we have good ag policy. I remember going to a little town called Hamlet, Illinois. The population is 48 people. And I used to drive through it in Mercer County, Illinois, on my way to someplace else. And I would see this lovely little sign. And I'm like, I wonder who lives in Hamlet, Illinois. And I wonder what they do for a living. And so I made this decision. I was going to spend a weekend and knock on every door there. It didn't take me even the full day. And as I'm walking down the street, there's a woman on a John Deere tractor just riding down the road. And she recognized me and she said, Cheri Bustos, what are you doing in Hamlet? And I said, I'm curious about Hamlet. I'm just knocking all the doors here just to see who lives here and what's everybody do for a living. And she said, well, I'm the last house as you leave town. Will you stop by my house? So I did. Well, they're hog farmers, pork producers, which is my family's ancestry. That's what my grandpa did for a living. My uncle did for a living. It's where my dad grew up on a hog farm. And this was at, when there were many subsidies that were helping farmers survive at that point. And she said to me, this isn't how we want to farm. We want to be able to just do well and sell our products and raise our hogs. And so I think look at what was happening under the Trump administration from an ag policy perspective and look at the ag and the farm and the rural policies under the Biden-Harris administration. And I would argue that the policies are better over the last 4 years than they were for the previous 4 years, where there has been investment in rural America. There has been making sure that rural co-ops can do well, to make sure that there is money there for rural development, that we are addressing things like the high-speed internet, that we are addressing things like the clean water supply. And by the way, I know there's sometimes arguments about Democrats that, we are hyper focused and unrealistically focused on climate change at the expense of our family farmer. And I don't believe that to be true either. I think that you've got reasonable people who will sit down and have conversations. And I think that's what we're going to see under a President Harris, and maybe even more importantly, under a guy like Tim Walz.
And Cheri, you represented a district similar to Walz in Congress. Can you tell us about your experience working with him?
Tim Walz is from a district like the one I represented. In fact, he was my mentor when I was first elected in 2012. We used to have this program that we would have assigned mentors, and the House leadership would try to partner a brand new member of Congress with an existing member of Congress who had similar districts or similar politics. And so Tim Walz was my assigned mentor. He comes from he was a farm boy, and he served in the military starting at age 17, like so many rural kids. We've got, we are overrepresented in rural America in the military. Tim Walz was one of those kids. And so he knows farm country. He knows farming. And by the way, he also knows hunting, like many of us do from rural communities. So this is a guy who isn't afraid to get his Carhartts on and isn't afraid to get his boots on and head to, the family farm down the street. So I am encouraged by what he brings to the table. He served on the Ag Committee, the House Ag Committee, so he even knows it from a policy perspective. So I think we are well positioned under the Harris-Walz team for the next 4 years in America and how that will look for rural America.
The Democratic Party platform also says it will make the farm sector the world's first to reach net zero emissions by 2050, including by paying farmers to adopt climate-smart practices. Is there support from farmers and rural America to bring this net zero emission vision to reality?
I think there's support as long as we do it right. There's got to be incentives to do that. You can't expect a family farmer to adopt new practices that could be considered risky from the perspective of how is this going to impact my yields? How is this going to the inputs? How is that going to impact my bottom dollar? So all of that has to be incentivized. And I think if we get that part of the next farm bill in the right place, I think absolutely they will be they will welcome this. Cover crops. How does that all look? But you can't ask a farm family to adopt these new practices and not have the economic incentive to do that. So I think as long as we get that in the right place, I think we'll be in a good place. Look, I lived in Moline, Illinois for many, many years. And the heart of the congressional district that I represented is out of Moline, Illinois. That is the world headquarters for John Deere. They have, they have this all kinds of technology that will help our farm families get to a better place from a climate perspective. Their sprayers, they have the sprayers called the See and Spray. So where all of these little tiny cameras will actually home in on, where are the weeds? So instead of just this mass spraying, they get to that very specific weed that they have to spray. And so you don't overspray. So that means your inputs are less. It means it's better for the environment. So I think in partnership with companies like John Deere, with good ag policy that will incentivize our farm families to practice climate smart agriculture, I think we're going to be in a good place.
Environmental groups have been quick to support Walz's work in the climate change space. As one of his former colleagues on the House Ag Committee, can you tell us about his work on conservation and climate change from his time in Congress and what we may expect from him in the administration?
Yeah, well, look, I think when you're part of a political party, you have certain values that bind us together. As Democrats, one of those values that bind us is that we do care about the climate, but we want to make sure that we are, and I would say this about Tim Walz, that we want to get there in a way that makes sense for rural America. Those are his roots. And so I don't see climate policy coming out of the Harris-Walz administration that doesn't keep in mind the practicality of being a family farmer. But at the same time, they will emphasize climate smart agriculture. That will be part of it. That is, again, the politics of Tim Walz, of coming from a Midwestern state, an agricultural state like Minnesota, coming from a congressional district that is heavy in family farms and agriculture. So I think what you will see going forward is it will involve a lot of language and policy around climate smart agriculture. I believe that a President Harris will ask a Vice President Walz to be a leader in that space and help lead that policy. And I think we're going to get that in a good place.
During your career, Cheri, you've run for election many times in Republican-dominated districts, and you've never lost. What strategies are currently working in the Harris-Walz campaign outreach to rural America?
Well, so Tim Walz called me the weekend before he was actually named as Kamala Harris's running mate, and his name had been out there, but he hadn't been named as her running mate. And my phone rings, and I see it comes up as Tim Walz, and so I answered, and I said, "Hello, VP Walz," and he said, "Isn't this crazy? I can't believe this. And I said, look, you've got a lot of your former colleagues who are really rooting for you and are weighing in and letting the Harris team know that we think you would be absolutely a perfect vice presidential running mate to her. And so why I share that story with you is as soon as he's named as VP running mate a few days later, I sent him a text and I said, look, you can take this or leave it, but here's my thoughts. Go to as many family farms as you can, as many small towns as you can, as many VFW halls as a veteran, a 24-year member of the National Guard. Go to the VFW halls and go to towns of 20,000 and fewer and 10,000 and fewer, and let them know who you are and what you stand for. Go to the UAW plant, that's building combines or building tractors, and so that was my advice to him. And look, we're only 2 weeks into this. We've got the Democratic the Democratic convention that's right around the corner here. And I think you will see Tim Walz showing up at places in small towns that, want to get to know what is this Harris Walz ticket all about and what's this Tim Walz guy all about. And I think they're going to be pleasantly surprised that this is a guy who's one of us. And when I say one of us, you're from Iowa, I'm from Illinois. I live in a small town, and you're from a smaller town. So look, he's like one of us, and I think that's what people are going to see over these next 80 whatever days until that election in November. And I think there's going to be people who are pleasantly surprised by who a guy like he is, what he brings to the Harris ticket, and that we're going to feel like we're well represented when we're from parts of the country like we're from.
What can we expect for a passage timeline and policy included in the Farm Bill if the Democratic ticket is elected in November?
No, I think they're going to have a sense of urgency around this. Now, keep in mind, who's going to hold the speaker's gavel? Will Democrats win back the majority? That's question number one. Will Democrats be able to hang on to the majority, or at least have a 50-50 Senate where a Tim Walz would be the tiebreaker? So it really does depend a lot on that as well. But I think you're going to see with a Harris Walz president, vice president in the White House. And if Democrats win back the majority in the House, I think we're going to see quick movement on that, because I am not as hopeful that we're going to get even anything done in the lame duck session for a farm bill. It's just there's so few days left of session that I think it's really hard to have that happen. Now that said, I hope I'm wrong. I hope this gets passed, and I hope we've got great policy. But you've got to have willing partners who can say, "Hey, I'm happy to work across the aisle so we can get a good farm bill passed." But I'm not very hopeful about that right now.
Well, Cheri, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Good to see you.